The dress cost $42. She found it at a thrift store on a Tuesday afternoon, buried between a rack of forgotten prom gowns and a sequin blazer that had seen better decades. It was pale blue. Simple. Clean lines. A little dated, maybe. But she ironed it carefully that morning, pinned her hair up the way her mother used to, and walked into that wedding like she belonged there. Because she did. But Derek didn't see it that way. He was standing near the champagne table when she walked in, tall, polished, the kind of man who had been told he was important so many times that he had started to believe it without question. He looked at her once. Just once. The way you look at something you've already decided doesn't matter. And then he leaned toward his friend and said, loud enough, deliberately loud enough, for half the room to hear, "Who let the charity case in?" And then he laughed. Not a quiet laugh. Not a private one. A laugh that expected company. A laugh that looked around for agreement the way a bully always does, needing witnesses, needing accomplices, needing the room to confirm what he had already decided. A few people smiled. Nervous smiles. The kind that don't reach the eyes. The kind people wear when they're not sure what side of something they're standing on yet. Elena heard every word. She heard the laugh, too. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn red. She didn't scan the room with wet eyes looking for someone to tell her it was okay. She didn't even pause mid-step. She simply reached for a glass of water from the nearest table, lifted it slowly, took one sip, and then she stood there looking out at the room the way you look at a view you've seen 100 times and still find worth looking at. Calm. Completely, unnervingly calm. And the thing is, the room felt that calm before it understood it. That's the thing about real stillness. It doesn't announce itself. It just sits there and takes up all the air. But Derek didn't know that yet. And what happened when he found out? What happened when the evening finally finished assembling itself around him like a closing room? Changed everything. Let's go back to that moment. Let's slow it all the way down, because this is the part you have to feel. The venue was extraordinary. High ceilings draped with white roses and cascading ivory ribbon that moved faintly whenever the doors opened. Crystal chandeliers hung low enough to feel intimate, scattering light across the room in small, cold explosions of gold. $40,000 of someone else's dream had been converted meticulously into table settings and tiered florals and a 5-tier cake that would be photographed more than it would be eaten. Every surface said, "This matters. We matter. Look at us." And in the middle of all of that stood Elena. $42 dress. Thrift store heels with a scuff on the left toe she hadn't bothered to cover. A single pearl earring on each ear that had belonged to her grandmother, passed down not because they were valuable, but because they were hers. She was not trying to impress anyone. That was the first thing people noticed. They couldn't have told you why it unsettled them, but it did. There is something quietly destabilizing about a person who genuinely does not need your approval. The room was full of people performing for each other, and Elena was simply standing there, present and unbothered, and it created a dissonance that nobody had the vocabulary for yet. When Derek said what he said, the room didn't erupt. That is not how these moments work. Not in rooms like this. Not among people who have been trained since childhood to keep their reactions below the surface. Humiliation in rooms like this is quiet. It moves like cold air under a closed door. You feel the chill before you locate the source. A woman near the floral arch heard it. She turned immediately, not toward Derek, but toward Elena, the way you turn toward someone who has just been struck without warning. Her eyes moved across Elena's face rapidly, searching for the wound, needing to locate the damage so she could decide how to respond. She found nothing. Elena's face was still, not the tense, held stillness of someone working very hard not to react, not the brittle stillness of someone about to shatter. The deep, settled stillness of someone who had long ago decided that other people's opinions of her were simply not her emergency. Somewhere behind Elena, a waiter paused with a tray of champagne flutes. He had heard it too. He stood there for one extra second, tray balanced, eyes forward, jaw tight, before he continued moving. That 1 second said everything he couldn't say out loud. A man near the bar looked at Derek, then looked at Elena, then looked back at Derek. He said nothing. He turned back to his drink. That silence, that particular silence, the kind that accumulates in a room without a single person choosing to break it, was the first thing Derek should have paid attention to. He didn't. He was still smiling. To understand what happens next, you have to understand who Elena actually was. Not who she appeared to be in that room. Not the version of her that Derek had assembled from a dress and a pair of thrift store heels and 2 minutes of observation. Who she actually was. Elena grew up in a large house at the edge of a small city. The kind of house with a library inside it that her father used more than any other room, and a garden that required a full-time groundskeeper who had worked there since before Elena was born. Her father, Thomas, had built his fortune the way certain men build things, without a press release, without a brand, without the need to be seen doing it. He moved quietly through the world of finance and development and infrastructure the way deep water moves, below the surface, shaping everything, making noise only when it finally hits something solid. He raised Elena the same way. The loudest person in the room, he used to tell her when she was a girl, cross-legged on the floor of his office while he worked, drawing on the back of documents he'd already signed, is almost never the most powerful one. She kept that. She kept it the way you keep something that turns out to be true every single time you test it. She went to university on her own insistence, not on a scholarship she needed, but because she needed to earn something by herself, needed to know the shape of her own capability outside the context of her father's name. She studied finance, stayed late, asked the hard questions in seminars when other students stayed quiet, graduated near the top of her class without telling anyone who her father was, without leveraging a single connection he had built, without using the safety net once. She came back different, quieter in the way that people are quiet after they've been tested and passed, not because they are soft, but because they are certain. She didn't need to announce herself anymore. She had been in rooms full of brilliant, ambitious, accomplished people, and she had held her own, and she knew it, and that knowledge lived inside her like a clean, steady flame that nobody else needed to see to be real. The wedding tonight was for her college friend Adora, warm, radiant Adora, who laughed too loudly and cried at commercials and had somehow managed to marry a man worthy of her. Adora's new husband, James, came from a family of considerable social ambition. The guest list had been constructed with surgical care. Old money, new money, business connections, people for whom a wedding was never entirely separate from networking. Elena had packed the pale blue dress without a second thought. She didn't own this event. She didn't need to. She owned herself. That had always been enough. Derek was James's cousin. The kind of cousin who arrives at family events already performing, already running the social calculus of who matters and who doesn't, already deciding before he walks in the door what the hierarchy of the room is going to be and where he sits within it. He had inherited enough to live without urgency, and he had spent years confusing that inherited cushion with earned authority. He wore his wealth the way insecure men always wear it, loudly, up front, as a preemptive defense against the question he was most afraid someone would ask. He had looked at Elena's dress. He had performed a calculation. He had gotten it catastrophically wrong. Here is what Elena had observed in the first 20 minutes of that reception, because she observed everything, quietly, without making it obvious. She watched Derek move through the room like a man pricing furniture. Everything assessed, categorized, filed under valuable or irrelevant. She watched him speak over the caterers, not to them. Watched him look through the wait staff, as if they were made of glass. watched him redirect conversations back to himself with the practiced smoothness of someone who had been doing it so long he no longer noticed he was doing it. She had seen men like Derek her entire life. She had met them at university, at firms, at dinners and events and board meetings where they looked at her and made the same calculation Derek had just made, and she had sat quietly and let them make it, and she had waited, and every single time, without exception, the room had eventually told the truth. She set her glass down and looked for Adora. Found her near the cake table, breathtaking in white, laughing at something James had whispered in her ear, the private laugh of a woman who has just married her best friend. Elena decided, in that moment of clarity, that she would not ruin Adora's wedding. That was the boundary. Silent, total, non-negotiable. She would not escalate. She would not react. She would not give Derek the gift of watching her diminish herself by responding to him. The night could do what the night was going to do. And then her phone buzzed. Her father. I'm outside. Traffic was awful. Save me a seat. She read it once. Looked up slowly. And something moved across her face. Not anger, not satisfaction, not anticipation exactly. Something quieter and more complete than any of those things. The expression of someone watching a long and inevitable equation finally balance itself. She typed back, "Come in whenever you're ready." She set the phone away, and she waited. Derek drifted back into her orbit about 15 minutes later, the way people do when they can't quite stop thinking about something they've dismissed. He looked at her with that same expression, dismissal layered over curiosity, like he couldn't reconcile the fact that she didn't seem bothered. "You're a friend of Adora's?" The question was an audit. A tree of. His voice carried the particular tone of a man deciding in real time whether this conversation was worth his energy. "I am," Elena said. A pause. He waited for more. She offered nothing. "From university?" "Yes." Another pause. He shifted his weight slightly. "What do you do?" And there it was. "Tell me your rank. Tell me your title. Give me something I can file you under. Give me a reason to keep talking to you. Or let me find a graceful way out of this conversation so I can go back to people who matter." Elena looked at him for a moment. Not a long moment. Just long enough to let him know she understood exactly what he was asking and exactly why. "Currently," she said pleasantly, "I'm between projects." Derek smiled the smile of a man who thinks he's just confirmed something. A small, self-satisfied smile that didn't require anyone else's input. "Right," he said. He moved on. He never asked her name. That detail would cost him more than he knew. The doors opened 20 minutes later. It didn't register at first. Doors open at weddings all evening. Late arrivals, people stepping out for air, caterers moving between the kitchen and the room. Nobody turned. Nobody looked. But the people closest to the entrance looked. And then the people nearest to them looked. Because something in the faces of the first group made them look. And then it moved, the way attention moves in a room. Not all at once, not with noise, but in a wave. A quiet, rolling, unstoppable wave of recognition. Thomas Reeves stood at the entrance to the hall. Tall, silver-haired, wearing a dark, perfectly cut suit with no tie, the jacket slightly creased from the drive, which somehow made him look more commanding rather than less. He had the unhurried quality of a man who had been the most important person in many rooms and had long since stopped needing anyone to acknowledge it. He stood at the entrance and did what he always did, scanned the room with steady, practiced calm, taking it in the way a man reads a document he's seen the template of 1,000 times. And then his eyes found Elena, and his whole face changed. Just changed. The professional composure dissolved completely, and what was underneath it was just a father. Just a tired, proud, happy father who had driven through terrible traffic to be in the same room as his daughter. His eyes warmed. Something in his shoulders released. He raised one hand in a small, unhurried wave. Across the room, Elena raised hers back. And the wave moved faster now. Because people knew that face. Not from television. Not from advertisements or profiles or social media. From board meetings. From signed agreements. From the kind of due diligence you do before you walk into a room and try to ask someone for money. Thomas Reeves was on the board of 3 companies represented in that hall tonight. He had co-signed a development project that had restructured a significant section of the city's financial district. He was the kind of man whose name you dropped to prove you were serious, and whose assistant you treated well because you understood the stakes. And he was walking, slowly, warmly, without the slightest interest in the effect he was having, toward the woman in the $42 dress. The silence didn't fall all at once. It arrived in pieces. A conversation near the bar stopped mid-sentence. Not finished, stopped. The way a sentence stops when something interrupts the part of your brain that was running it. 2 women near the windows turned to each other with a look that asked a question neither of them said out loud. A man set his glass down on the nearest table, not because he was done with it, but because his hands needed to be free for a moment while he processed what he was seeing. Derek was mid-story near the bar. Something about a trip, a deal, a number. His audience had been engaged 30 seconds ago. Now one of them had glanced toward the door. Then another. Derek kept talking for a half-sentence more. That terrible extra half-sentence when you haven't yet realized you've lost the room. And then he stopped too. He followed their eyes. He saw Thomas Reeves. He did not immediately understand. He saw a distinguished older man he half recognized and felt the specific discomfort of not being able to place the recognition. He watched the man move across the room. Watched the room move around the man the way water moves around something solid, reshaping itself, orienting itself, finding a new center of gravity without being told to. And then Thomas Reeves reached Elena, and he pulled her into an embrace that was unreserved and total. The embrace of a parent who had not seen their child in 3 weeks and was not performing love for anyone's benefit because it had never once occurred to him that love required performance. He pulled back and looked at her. "You look beautiful," he said, and his voice was quiet, but the room had gotten quiet enough that it carried. "It's a $42 dress," she said. And she was smiling now, a real smile, warm and unhurried and lit from somewhere inside. The first truly unguarded moment she had allowed herself all evening. He laughed. "It suits you perfectly." And that was when Derek placed him. You could see the exact moment it happened. His face did not collapse, it subtracted. Features that had been animated went neutral. The story he had been telling fell away like something dropped. His mind was running backward through the evening with a speed and thoroughness that his expression could not entirely conceal, and what it was finding as it ran, what it was assembling, piece by piece, scene by scene, word by word, was a portrait of catastrophic miscalculation rendered in real time. Who let the charity case in? He had said it at a volume designed to be heard, in a room full of people who could now see exactly who she was. His friend, the one he had said it to, the one who had laughed, was standing beside him again, and the laugh was gone from him entirely. He was looking at the floor, specifically at the floor, with the focused attention of a man who has decided that the floor is the single most interesting object in the room and plans to study it indefinitely. Derek said nothing. James, Nadia's husband, Derek's cousin, the man whose wedding this was, caught Derek's eye from across the room. The look he gave him was not warm. It was not angry. It was something more precise than anger. It was the look of a man doing an accounting, measuring a cost, deciding how long it was going to take to forget what he now knew about his cousin's character. Derek held that look for 2 seconds and then looked away. Elena had not looked at Derek once since her father arrived. That absence, the fact that she had not looked at him, had not savored it, had not searched for his reaction, had not given him even the dignity of her attention, was somehow the most devastating thing of all. She wasn't ignoring him. She had simply moved on. He had become irrelevant. He had been irrelevant to her from the beginning. She had simply been polite enough not to demonstrate it. Thomas was speaking with a small group now. 2 men and a woman who had approached him within minutes of his arrival, specifically, purposefully, the way people approach someone they've been hoping to meet in person. He was relaxed and generous and fully present in the way that people are when they have nothing to prove and nowhere better to be. Someone brought him a drink without being asked. Elena stood at his side, not behind him, not deferred, at his side, contributing to the conversation in the easy, fluent way of someone who knew the subject and the room equally well. And then Adora moved. Adora, who had spotted Thomas the moment he walked in because Adora had known this family for years and loved Elena the way you love the people who knew you before you knew yourself. Adora crossed the room with her husband's hand in hers, and she made a choice. A deliberate, precise, generous, irrevocable choice. She raised her voice just enough. Not theatrical, not aggressive, just enough. Everyone, I want you to meet Elena Reeves. One of my oldest friends, and genuinely one of the most brilliant people I know. A pause. A warm, unhurried pause. And of course her father, Thomas, who I have been absolutely failing to convince to dance all evening. Laughter moved through the room. Warm laughter, relieved laughter, the kind of laughter that realigns a room around a new truth. Glasses were raised. Greetings were called. The room folded itself around Elena the way it had not 30 minutes ago, and it did so without ceremony or drama. It did so the way rooms fold around people who were always supposed to be at their center. Derek stood at the bar. He was very still now. His champagne glass was in his hand, but he had stopped drinking from it at some point and hadn't noticed. He was looking at the small constellation of people around Elena and Thomas, at the warmth moving through the room, at the particular quality of attention that surrounds someone when a room has decided they matter, and he was feeling the full, cold, irrevocable weight of what one sentence had cost him. Not money, not status, not position, reputation, the invisible currency that everything else is built on. The thing you spend years accumulating and can lose in one public, witnessed, unambiguous moment of cruelty towards someone who turned out to be, who had always been, precisely the person you should have treated with care. He set his glass down. He looked for a way to exist in that room that didn't feel like what it felt like. He couldn't find one. When he finally crossed toward Elena, and it took him a long time, and the walk across that room was the longest walk he had taken in years, he had rehearsed something. He had assembled words into a shape he told himself was an apology. He waited at the edge of the conversation for a gap, and the gap came, and he stepped into it. Elena. It was the first time he had used her name, because it was the first time he had known it. I think something I said earlier. She turned to face him. Fully. She gave him the full, composed weight of her attention, and he felt it. He felt it the way you feel a temperature change when you walk into a different room. She was not cold. She was not vicious. She was simply completely, unsentimentally present, and that presence had a quality to it that made him feel, for the first time that evening, genuinely seen. Not flattered. Seen. She waited. He had lost the rehearsed sentence. He found a simpler one. I said something awful to you. In front of people. And you called me a charity case, she said. Not loudly. Not sharply. She said it the way you state a fact that everyone in earshot already knows, plainly, without ornament, without drama, without any visible desire to damage him. She simply said it, because it was true, and because she had decided a long time ago that the truth did not require softening for the comfort of the person who had created it. The 2 people nearest to them had gone very still. Derek said nothing for a moment. He felt the sentence land in the room, felt its weight distributed across the witnesses around them, felt, for the first time in a very long time, The specific discomfort of accountability, not consequence, not punishment, but the plain, undecorated experience of being known for what you had done. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it in a way he had not meant anything all evening. Elena looked at him. "One beat. Two." "I know," she said, and she turned back to her father's conversation. Not as a performance, not for the room, simply because she was done, because there was nothing more to resolve, because she had received the apology and the accounting was complete, and she had a father who had driven through terrible traffic to be with her, and a friend in a white dress who was getting married tonight, and none of the remaining hours of this beautiful evening needed to be spent on Derek. He stood there for another moment. Nobody filled the silence for him. Nobody rescued him from the particular loneliness of having been exactly who you are and having the room know it. He left early, quietly, without ceremony. The story did not leave with him. It moved through the room that night and then out into the world beyond it, the way these stories do, person to person, phone to phone, table to table, sharpening slightly with each retelling, not because people embellished it, but because the truth of it was already sharp enough to cut. The man who mocked a woman for her dress at a $40,000 wedding and discovered, in real time, in front of 30 witnesses, who she actually was. The way she had not flinched, the way she had not retaliated, the look she had given him at the end, that quiet, complete, entirely indifferent look. Within a week it had reached every room that mattered to Derek. He had not lost his money. Money was the least of what he had. He had lost the thing that money cannot buy back, the assumption of good character, the benefit of the doubt, the invisible social currency that people extend to you before you've earned it, that you can spend your whole life building and lose in a single witnessed moment of contempt for someone who deserved none of it. Later that night, after the speeches and the dancing and the moment when Adora cried during the last slow song in the way only brides cry at the end of weddings, when it's not sadness, exactly, but the overwhelming completeness of a day you can never live again, Elena slipped outside. The city was below and beyond her, glittering in a way cities only do when you're above them and tired and have had just enough champagne to appreciate something you normally walk past. The air was late summer, warm at the surface, with something cooler moving underneath it, a reminder that seasons change whether you notice them or not. She stood there in the quiet for a while. She was still wearing the $42 dress. She had not once, at any point in the evening, wished she wasn't. Her father found her the way he always found her, without being summoned, because he had always had the particular quality of knowing when she needed him nearby and when she needed him to stay at a distance. He came out quietly and stood beside her, and they were both silent for a while, looking at the city, and the silence was not empty but full of 30 years of knowing each other, full of Sunday dinners and hard conversations, and the specific, unspoken language of a father and daughter who had been genuinely honest with each other for as long as either of them could remember. "Did someone bother you tonight?" he said eventually. She thought about it, really thought about it, not performing consideration, but actually sitting with the question. "Someone showed me who they were," she said. Thomas was quiet. And I let them." Another silence. The city moved below them. Somewhere inside the venue, music started again, something slow, something old. "You didn't feel the need to correct him yourself?" She looked at the lights for a moment. "The room did that," she said. "I didn't have to." He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him slightly, and they stood together in the good warm dark with the city spread out below them like something that had always been theirs. In the weeks that followed, Elena's life continued with the same unspectacular steadiness it had always had. She took a meeting with a development group she had been consulting for, a project that, when it finished, would bear Thomas Reeves's name on the exterior and Elena's fingerprints on every financial architecture that had made it viable. She had lunch with Adora back from a short honeymoon, glowing and slightly sunburned, who apologized for her new husband's family with the particular pained sincerity of a woman still learning the full dimensions of what she had married into. "Don't," Elena told her. "He taught me something." "What?" "That humiliation says more about the person doing it than the person receiving it." Adora was quiet for a moment, looking at her. "I wish I were more like you," she said. Elena laughed, really laughed, warm and spontaneous and genuine. "You're exactly like yourself," she said. "That's the whole thing. That's the entire thing." Derek had sent a formal written apology through James. Elena had read it carefully, acknowledged the effort it had taken, and moved on from it. She did not hold it against him. She did not forget it either. These are not contradictions. They are simply what it looks like when a person has done the work of understanding that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not something you do to clear someone else's debt. The $42 dress still hung in her closet. She had worn it again, to a board meeting, where she had been the youngest person in the room by nearly 15 years, in a building that bore her father's name on the outside and her ideas on every page of the proposal they were reviewing. She had walked in exactly the way she always walked into rooms, quietly, without ceremony, completely at ease, as if she had always belonged there and always would. Because she always had. And that was the whole lesson. The one that the evening at the $40,000 wedding had demonstrated, but had not created. The dress had not been the point. Derek had not been the point. The room's recognition had not been the point. The point was that Elena had walked in knowing, before a single person confirmed it, before her father arrived, before Adora said her name out loud to the assembled room, before Derek understood what he had done, before any of it. She had walked in knowing exactly who she was. And that knowing, that settled, unperformative, unshakable knowing, was the thing that no $40,000 wedding, no inherited wealth, no designer dress, no public moment of recognition could give her. She had built it herself. In quiet rooms and long hours and years of choosing to know herself, rather than waiting for the world to confirm her. A few months after the wedding, Elena was back in her father's house for Sunday dinner, a ritual that had run unbroken since childhood, through university years and working years and all the distances that life inserts between people who love each other. Her grandmother's pearl earrings were on the dresser in the guest room where she always stayed. She picked one up before going downstairs, held it for a moment, cool and smooth and small, the weight of something passed down not for its price, but for what it meant. Worn by a woman before her who had also known herself, who had also moved through the world on her own terms, who had also understood that dignity is not given to you by rooms full of people. It is carried in. She set the earring down gently. From downstairs, she could hear her father in the kitchen, the sound of a pan on the stove, a drawer opened and closed, the low thread of music he always played on Sunday evenings, the background score of her entire life. She walked downstairs, set the table, sat in the chair she had sat in since she was small enough to need help climbing into it. And she was okay. She was whole. She was exactly, precisely, completely, fully, who she had always been. The real victory was never the moment the room shifted. The real victory was that she had never needed the room to know who she was. She already knew. She had always known. And she walked into every room in her life, carrying that knowledge the way her grandmother's earrings carried warmth. Quietly, closely, only ever visible to those paying the right kind of attention. She didn't win by fighting. She didn't win by announcing herself. She won by already knowing, before a single person in that room confirmed it, exactly who she was. And here is what you need to understand about that kind of certainty. Nobody can humiliate a woman who has already decided she cannot be diminished. They can try. They will try. But they will be performing for an audience that has already seen how the story ends. The dress was $42. The woman wearing it was never, for a single second, less than everything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere right now, a woman is standing in a room where someone has underestimated her. And she deserves to know. The room always catches up. It always does. Subscribe and come back for more stories about the quiet, undefeatable power of knowing your worth.